I never thought installing a heated driveway would nearly land me in court. But here I am, sitting across from a lawyer because Brenda Vincent decided her vendetta against modern home improvements was more important than basic safety. My name is Quentin Harlow, and I've lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Aurora, Colorado for 3 years now. It's one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods where every house looks vaguely similar. The lawns are maintained with military precision, and the HOA rules could fill a small library. When I bought my 4-bedroom colonial, I knew there'd be some restrictions, but I figured as long as I kept my grass trimmed and didn't paint my house neon pink, I'd be fine. I was wrong. The trouble started last October when I decided to install a radiant heating system in my driveway. Colorado winters are brutal, and I was tired of spending every morning scraping ice off the concrete and throwing down salt that would eat away at the surface. My neighbor, Tom, had one installed the previous year and swore by it. The system runs hot water through tubes embedded in the concrete, keeping the surface just warm enough to melt snow and ice. No more shoveling, no more slipping, no more back pain from hours of winter maintenance. I went through all the proper channels. I submitted my application to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. Included detailed plans from the contractor, specifications for the system, and even photos of what the finished product would look like, which was basically just a normal driveway because the heating elements are buried underneath. The whole installation would cost me about $15,000, but I'd done the math. Between the time saved, the reduced wear on my back, and the increased home value, it made perfect sense. The committee approved it after 2 weeks. I got a formal letter in the mail with the official stamp and everything. My contractor, a guy named Rick who'd been doing this work for 20 years, started the project in early November. We had to tear up the old driveway, lay down the tubing system, pour new concrete, and let it cure properly before the first major snowfall. The whole thing took about 3 weeks, and by Thanksgiving, I had a beautiful new driveway that looked identical to the old one, except now it had a superpower. The first snow came the second week of December. I woke up to 4 inches of fresh powder covering everything in sight. My neighbors were outside in their parkas, firing up their snowblowers and grabbing their shovels. I made myself a cup of coffee, flipped the switch on my heating system control panel in the garage, and watched through my window as my driveway slowly became the only clear patch of concrete on the entire street. It was glorious. That evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda Vincent standing on my porch, bundled up in a puffy coat that made her look like a burgundy marshmallow. Brenda was the HOA president, a position she'd held for the past 7 years through a combination of ruthless election tactics and the fact that nobody else wanted to deal with the constant complaints and paperwork. She was 52, had the kind of blonde highlights that came from an expensive salon, and possessed the unique ability to find problems where none existed. "Quentin," she said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, "we need to talk about your driveway." "What about it?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I got approval from the committee. Everything's up to code." "It's creating an unfair advantage," she said, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Other homeowners are concerned that it makes their properties look poorly maintained by comparison." I stared at her. "Brenda, it's a driveway. It's clear because I installed a heating system. Anyone else can do the same thing if they want." "Not everyone can afford such extravagances," she sniffed, "and it's ostentatious." "It's practical," I countered, and again I got approval. "This isn't a discussion we need to have." She shifted her weight, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. I'm calling an emergency board meeting to review the decision. There may have been an oversight in the approval process." "There wasn't," I said firmly. "I followed every rule, submitted every form, and waited for official approval before starting the work." "This is done, Brenda." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She turned and marched back down my walkway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice near the street. I closed the door and leaned against it, already exhausted by the interaction. My wife, Sarah, had warned me before we moved here that HOAs could be difficult, but I'd brushed it off. How bad could it be, I'd thought. Very bad, apparently. The emergency board meeting happened 3 days later on a Thursday evening. I showed up at the community center with my folder of documents, including my original application, the approval letter, the contractor's permits, and even the relevant sections of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions that I'd highlighted. There were about 15 people in attendance, mostly board members and a few nosy neighbors who treated HOA meetings like prime time entertainment. Brenda sat at the head table with 4 other board members. There was Gerald, a retired accountant who mostly nodded along with whatever Brenda said. Patricia, a real estate agent who at least tried to be reasonable most of the time. Marcus, a younger guy who worked in tech and seemed perpetually confused about why he'd agreed to be on the board. And finally, Dorothy, who was about 80 years old and spent most meetings knitting. "This emergency session has been called to review the approval of Quentin Harlow's driveway heating system," Brenda announced, reading from a prepared statement. "It has come to the board's attention that this installation may violate the spirit of our community guidelines regarding uniformity and aesthetic standards." I raised my hand. "Can I speak?" "You'll have a chance during the comment period," Brenda said dismissively. She proceeded to spend 20 minutes explaining her theory that heated driveways created visual disparity during winter months and could potentially devalue surrounding properties because they'd look neglected by comparison. It was circular logic at its finest. She'd even prepared a PowerPoint presentation with photos of my clear driveway next to my neighbor's snow-covered ones, as if this was somehow evidence of wrongdoing on my part. When she finally finished, Patricia spoke up. "Brenda, I'm not sure I understand the issue." Mr. Harlow received proper approval. The installation doesn't violate any specific rules. And frankly, as a real estate agent, I can tell you that heated driveways increase property values, not decrease them. "But the aesthetic impact," Brenda insisted, "is that he has a clear driveway." Marcus added, looking at his copy of my application. "Because that seems like a good thing. I mean, isn't the whole point of our HOA to maintain property values? This does that." Brenda's face was reddening. "I'm requesting that we add a new rule requiring homeowners to turn off heated driveways during snowfall to maintain visual consistency with the neighborhood." The room went silent. Even Gerald looked skeptical. "That completely defeats the purpose of having a heated driveway," I said, unable to stay quiet. "The whole point is to keep it clear during snow. And we can't retroactively apply new rules to existing improvements," Patricia added. "That's not how any of this works." The vote was called. Only Brenda and Gerald voted in favor of her proposal. It failed, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The meeting adjourned, and I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. Over the next 2 weeks, Brenda became obsessed. She started a neighborhood Facebook group called Concerned Citizens of Meadowbrook Heights and posted daily rants about the heated driveway problem. She sent out a survey asking residents if they felt pressured to make expensive home improvements because of my driveway. She even tried to organize a petition, but only got about 8 signatures, mostly from people who probably didn't read what they were signing. I ignored most of it. Sarah told me to just let Brenda tire herself out, that she'd eventually move on to some other perceived crisis. My neighbors were mostly supportive. Tom thought the whole thing was hilarious. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down told me she was thinking of getting a heated driveway installed herself after seeing how well mine worked, but Brenda wasn't done. On December 23rd, I came home from work to find a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, written on official letterhead, and signed by Brenda in her capacity as president. The letter claimed that my heated driveway was causing excessive snow melt runoff that was creating ice patches on the street and sidewalk, presenting a safety hazard to the community. It demanded that I cease using the heating system immediately and threatened daily fines of $100 if I didn't comply. I read the letter 3 times, each time getting angrier. It was complete nonsense. The system was designed to melt snow and drain properly. Any water that did run off was minimal and no different than what happened when anyone else shoveled their driveway or used salt. If anything, my system was safer because there was no ice on my driveway itself. I called Patricia, who I'd learned was the most reasonable board member. "Quentin, I didn't know anything about this letter until after Brenda sent it," she said, sounding frustrated. "She claims she has executive authority to issue safety notices without full board approval." "Does she?" "It's a gray area in our bylaws. Technically, the president can issue temporary safety directives, but this is clearly an abuse of that power. I'm calling for another board meeting to override this, but it won't happen until after Christmas." "So what do I do in the meantime?" "Keep using your driveway," Patricia advised. "Document everything. Take photos showing there's no safety hazard. And honestly, you might want to talk to a lawyer. Brenda's gone off the rails on this one." I followed her advice. Every time it snowed, I took photos and videos of my driveway and the surrounding area. I showed that any melt water drained properly into the street drainage system. I even had Rick, my contractor, come out and write up a professional assessment confirming that the system was functioning exactly as designed and posed no safety risk. Christmas came and went. My heated driveway continued to work perfectly. Brenda continued to post angry screeds on social media. The neighborhood was starting to split into factions, with most people thinking Brenda was being ridiculous, but a few supporting her out of general principle or personal loyalty. Then came New Year's Eve. Colorado got hit with a major winter storm that night. By the morning of January 1st, we had almost 8 inches of snow, and the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees. It was the kind of day where you really didn't want to be outside if you could help it. I flipped on my heating system and settled in to watch football and recover from the previous night's festivities. Around 2 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang insistently. I opened it to find Brenda standing there, her face red from cold and anger. "Turn it off," she demanded, pointing at my driveway. "Excuse me. Turn off your heating system right now. This is your final warning before I start issuing daily fines." "Brenda, you can't do this. The board is meeting next week to discuss your letter. Until then, I'm not doing anything. I am the president of this HOA, and I am ordering you to turn off that system. You're creating a safety hazard." "I'm not creating anything except a clear driveway on my own property," I said, my patience running out. "If you don't like it, take it up with the full board." "Fine," she said, her voice rising. "Then I'll file a complaint with the county code enforcement. I'll report you to the city. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of neighbor you are." "Do whatever you need to do," I said and closed the door. Through my window, I watched her stomp back down my walkway. She was so focused on glaring back at my house that she wasn't paying attention to where she was going. When she reached the end of my property line and stepped onto her own sidewalk, which was covered in packed snow and ice, her feet went out from under her. She fell hard, landing on her right side. I heard her scream even through my closed door. I ran outside without even grabbing my coat. "Brenda, are you okay?" She was sitting on the ground, clutching her right wrist, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts, oh God, it hurts so much." I called 911 immediately. While we waited for the ambulance, I helped her sit up against her mailbox post and brought her a blanket from my house. Her wrist was already swelling, bent at an angle that made me queasy. "This is your fault," she gasped between pained breaths. "Your driveway, the runoff, it made this ice." I looked down at where she'd fallen. It was on her own property, nowhere near my driveway. Her entire front walk was covered in snow and ice because she hadn't shoveled or salted it. There was no runoff from my property. If anything, the irony was almost too perfect. She'd spent weeks complaining about my heated driveway being a safety hazard while her own ice-covered walkway was the actual danger. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. The paramedics checked her out, confirmed that her wrist was likely broken, and loaded her onto a stretcher. Her husband, Dale, had been at work and came racing home when the paramedics called him. He rode with her to the hospital. I went back inside, my hands shaking from adrenaline. Sarah came downstairs, having heard the commotion. "What happened?" I explained the whole thing. She listened, her eyes getting wider. "You know she's going to blame you for this, right?" Sarah said. "She already did, but I have cameras." I pulled up the footage from my doorbell camera, which had captured the entire incident. It clearly showed Brenda stepping off my property onto her own icy sidewalk and falling. There was no way to argue that my driveway had anything to do with it. "Save that footage," Sarah advised. "Something tells me we're going to need it." She was right. Brenda came home from the hospital that evening with her wrist in a cast and a prescription for pain medication. I sent Dale a text message asking how she was doing and offering any help they might need. He responded with a terse, "She's fine," and nothing else. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA's lawyer. It informed me that Brenda Vincent was pursuing legal action against me for personal injury, claiming that the runoff from my heated driveway had created the icy conditions that caused her fall. The email stated that I should contact my homeowner's insurance company and retain legal counsel. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the email in disbelief. This woman had harassed me for months, issued bogus safety violations, threatened me with fines, and now she was suing me because she fell on her own icy sidewalk. I called my insurance company first. They assigned a claims adjuster named Monica who listened to my story and asked me to send all my documentation, including the doorbell camera footage. Then I called a lawyer, David Simmons, who specialized in HOA disputes. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon. David's office was in a professional building in downtown Aurora. He was in his mid-40s, had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every variety of human petness, and he listened to my story without interrupting. "You have the video?" he asked when I finished. I pulled it up on my phone and showed him. He watched it 3 times, making notes. "This is good," he said. "This clearly shows she fell on her own property, not yours, but here's what's going to happen. Her lawyer is going to argue that your heated driveway created snowmelt that flowed onto her property and froze, creating the hazardous condition. They'll try to establish a chain of causation. But that's not what happened. I have photos and videos showing my drainage works correctly. The water goes into the street drain. I know, and we'll use those, But be prepared for this to get ugly. She's already demonstrated she's willing to abuse her position as HOA president. She's not going to back down easily. What do? Document everything. Keep taking photos and videos every time it snows. Don't communicate with her directly. Everything goes through lawyers now, and we need to get ahead of this with the HOA board. Is there a meeting scheduled? Next Wednesday. Perfect. We're going to request time to address the board and present our side of this. I also want to file a counterclaim against her for harassment and abuse of authority. Over the next week, I became obsessive about documentation. Every time it snowed, I took dozens of photos and videos from every angle, showing how the water from my driveway drained properly into the street. I compiled a timeline of all of Brenda's actions, from her first complaint through the threatening letters and social media posts. David helped me put together a comprehensive package that made it very clear this was a vendetta, not a legitimate safety concern. The board meeting on Wednesday night was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood about Brenda's lawsuit, and apparently, people had opinions. I arrived with David, and we took seats near the front. Brenda was there too, her casted wrist in a sling, sitting with a lawyer of her own. Patricia called the meeting to order. We have several matters to address tonight, but first, I want to note that Brenda Vincent has recused herself from any votes regarding the heated driveway issue due to her personal injury and ongoing litigation. Brenda opened her mouth to object, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and whispered something to her. She closed her mouth but looked furious. David stood up. I'm representing Mr. Harlow in this matter. We're requesting that the board formally withdraw the safety violation notice issued to my client on December 23rd, as it was issued without proper board authorization and is factually baseless. Patricia nodded. I think we can address that right now. All in favor of withdrawing the notice? 4 hands went up, everyone except Gerald, who glanced nervously at Brenda before abstaining. Motion carries, Patricia announced. The notice is withdrawn and no fines will be assessed. Furthermore, David continued, we're requesting that the board conduct a formal review of President Vincent's conduct in this matter. She has repeatedly attempted to use her position to harass my client over a legally approved home improvement. This escalated to issuing unauthorized violation notices and has now resulted in a frivolous lawsuit. Brenda's lawyer stood up. My client acted in good faith to address what she believed was a safety concern. Her subsequent injury validates those concerns. Her injury occurred on her own property due to her own failure to maintain her walkway. David shot back. We have video evidence that conclusively proves this. The meeting devolved into arguments between the lawyers while the board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, Marcus spoke up. Can we see this video? David pulled out his laptop and played the doorbell footage on the screen at the front of the room. The room went completely silent as everyone watched Brenda demand I turn off my heating system, stomp away in anger, and fall on her own icy sidewalk several feet away from my property line. When it ended, Patricia spoke carefully. It appears that Mrs. Vincent's fall occurred entirely on her own property, with no visible connection to Mr. Harlow's driveway. This doesn't show the underlying ice formation, Brenda's lawyer argued. We maintain that runoff from the heated driveway created the hazardous condition. Then you'll have to prove that in court, David said. But in the meantime, the board needs to decide whether they're going to allow their president to use HOA resources to pursue a personal vendetta. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. Finally, Dorothy, the elderly board member who usually stayed quiet, spoke up in her wavering voice. I've been on this board for 12 years. I've seen a lot of silly disputes, but this takes the cake. That young man got proper approval for his driveway. He followed all the rules. And now he's being punished because Brenda doesn't like it. This isn't right." "Thank you, Dorothy," Patricia said. She looked at the other board members. "I think we need to vote on whether to continue supporting the HOA's involvement in this matter. This lawsuit is between Mrs. Vincent and Mr. Harlow. The HOA shouldn't be taking sides." The vote was unanimous, with Brenda abstaining. The HOA would remain neutral in the lawsuit, and Brenda would not be permitted to use her position or HOA resources in relation to the dispute. Brenda stood up, her face purple with rage. "This is unacceptable. I am the president of this organization. And you're subject to the same rules as everyone else," Patricia said firmly. "This meeting is adjourned." People filed out, and I received several supportive comments from neighbors. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "That video is incredible. She literally brought this on herself." "I just want this whole thing to be over," I said. But it wasn't over, not by a long shot. 2 days later, I received notice that Brenda's lawsuit had been formally filed in Arapahoe County District Court. She was suing me for $75,000, claiming medical expenses, pain and suffering, and emotional distress. The complaint was 12 pages long and painted a picture of me as a reckless homeowner who'd installed a dangerous system without regard for my neighbor's safety. David filed our response, denying all allegations and including a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of authority, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We requested that Brenda pay my legal fees and issue a formal apology. The discovery phase began in February. Both sides requested documents, photos, videos, and statements. Brenda's lawyer deposed me for 4 hours, asking detailed questions about the installation, the system's operation, and every interaction I'd had with Brenda. I answered honestly and calmly, while David objected to the more ridiculous questions. We deposed Brenda a week later. It did not go well for her. She was combative and defensive, constantly going off on tangents about how I'd ruined the neighborhood aesthetic. When David asked her about the condition of her own sidewalk on the day of the fall, she claimed she'd shoveled it that morning. "Do you have any evidence of that?" David asked. "I don't need evidence. I know I did it." "So you're saying you shoveled and salted your sidewalk on the morning of January 1st? "Yes." "And yet, when the paramedics arrived, they noted in their report that your entire front walkway was covered in packed snow and ice with no evidence of recent clearing. How do you explain that?" She floundered, claiming it must have re-iced in the few hours between her supposed shoveling and her fall. It was obviously false, and her lawyer looked pained. We also deposed her husband, Dale, who admitted under oath that Brenda had not shoveled their walkway that day. In fact, they'd been arguing about it that morning because he'd asked her to clear it, and she'd said she'd do it later. With the depositions complete, David filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that there was no genuine dispute of material fact. The video clearly showed Brenda fell on her own property. The evidence showed she hadn't maintained her walkway, and there was no credible evidence that my heated driveway had contributed to the ice formation on her property. The hearing on the motion was scheduled for late March. I took the morning off work to attend. The courtroom was formal and intimidating, with dark wood paneling and a stern-looking judge named Margaret Sullivan. Both lawyers made their arguments. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that there were still factual questions about where the ice came from, but Judge Sullivan wasn't buying it. "Counselor, I've reviewed the video evidence multiple times," she said. "Your client fell on her own property, which by all accounts she had failed to maintain. Do you have any actual evidence that water from Mr. Harlow's driveway caused the ice formation? we have Mrs. Vincent's observations that I'm asking for physical evidence, photos, video, expert testimony, anything concrete. We have our client's statement, which contradicts the physical evidence and witness statements. Motion for summary judgment is granted. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Harlow his reasonable attorney's fees and costs. Mrs. Vincent, you may want to consider this a lesson in not pursuing litigation out of spite. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. David shook my hand and we left the courtroom. Brenda and her lawyer stayed behind, and I could hear her raised voice as we walked down the hall. But the drama wasn't quite finished. At the next HOA board meeting in early April, Patricia announced that Brenda had resigned as president, effective immediately. She'd also resigned from the board entirely. Patricia was elected as the new president, and the board voted to formally apologize to me for the harassment I'd endured. We want to make it clear that homeowners who follow the proper procedures and receive approval for improvements will not be subjected to this kind of treatment, Patricia said. We're also revising our bylaws to add more checks on executive authority to prevent future abuses. I thanked them and felt like I could finally move on with my life. The following week, I received a check from Brenda for $12,000, covering my legal fees as ordered by the court. There was no note, no apology, just the check. Sarah and I used some of the money to take a much-needed vacation to Hawaii. When we got back in May, I noticed that the for sale sign had gone up in front of Brenda's house. They moved out in June, and I never saw her again. A young couple with a baby bought the house. When they introduced themselves, the husband, Jason, asked me about my heated driveway. I've been thinking about getting one installed, he said. Does it work well? It works great, I told him. I can give you my contractor's number if you want. By the following winter, Jason had his own heated driveway installed. So did Mrs. Chen and 2 other families on the street. The neighborhood Facebook group that Brenda had started to complain about my driveway became a resource for people researching heated driveway systems and sharing contractor recommendations. Tom found this hilarious. Brenda tried to stop one heated driveway and ended up causing 5 more to be installed. That's got to be some kind of karma record. I agreed. Every time it snowed, I made my coffee, flipped the switch, and watched my driveway clear while I stayed warm inside. No more shoveling, no more ice, no more back pain, and definitely no more HOA drama. Patricia turned out to be an excellent HOA president. She streamlined the approval process for home improvements, made board meetings more efficient, and generally treated everyone with respect and common sense. The neighborhood felt more relaxed, less like we were all walking on eggshells waiting for someone to complain about the color of our mailbox or the height of our grass. I ran into Dale, Brenda's ex-husband, at the grocery store about a year after they'd moved. It was a bit awkward at first, but he actually approached me. "Hey, Quentin," he said. "I just wanted to apologize for everything that happened. Brenda, she gets fixated on things, and once she decides something is wrong, there's no talking her out of it." "It's okay," I said, meaning it. "Is she doing all right?" "She's fine. We moved to a house outside the HOA system," he said with a wry smile. "Seemed like the safer choice for everyone involved. Her wrist healed up fine, by the way, no lasting damage. That's good to hear. For what it's worth, I always thought your driveway was a great idea. I tried to tell her to let it go, but..." He shrugged. "Well, you know how that went." We chatted for a few more minutes about inconsequential things and then went our separate ways. I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. The story became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Heights. New residents would hear about the great heated driveway dispute from their neighbors, usually accompanied by laughter and warnings about making sure you know who your HOA president is before buying a house. My doorbell camera footage even made it onto a local news segment about HOA disputes gone wrong. The reporter interviewed me in my driveway during a snowstorm, the heated concrete clear behind me while snow fell all around. "So what advice would you give to homeowners dealing with difficult HOA situations?" she asked. "Document everything," I said. "Follow the rules, get everything in writing, and don't let someone abuse their authority just because they have a title. Most people are reasonable, but if you encounter someone who isn't, you need to protect yourself." The segment aired during the evening news, and I got texts from friends and former colleagues who'd seen it. My 15 minutes of fame, courtesy of an HOA dispute over a heated driveway. Through it all, the driveway itself just kept working perfectly. Rick, the contractor, had done excellent work, and the system never gave me a single problem. Every winter, it saved me hours of labor and eliminated one of the most annoying aspects of living in Colorado. I calculated once that between the time saved, the reduced wear and tear on my back, and the increased home value, the system would pay for itself in about 12 years. Of course, that didn't account for the legal fees, which technically put me in the red on the whole endeavor. But honestly, it was worth it just for the peace of mind and the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up to someone who tried to abuse their authority. The following winter, during the first major snowstorm of the season, I looked out my window and counted 6 clear driveways on my street, all equipped with the same heating system I had. It made me smile. Brenda had tried so hard to prevent something she saw as wrong, and instead, she'd inadvertently advertised its benefits to the entire neighborhood. Patricia knocked on my door that afternoon with a plate of cookies. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "What you went through was awful, but it exposed some serious problems in how our HOA was being run. We've fixed a lot of those issues now." "I'm glad something good came out of it," I said, accepting the cookies. "More than you know." We've had 3 other homeowners come forward about issues where Brenda had threatened them or tried to block approved improvements. Nothing as extreme as what happened to you, but still not okay. We're working to make sure everyone knows their rights and that the board serves the community, not the other way around. That was the thing about the whole experience. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive and frustrating beyond belief. But it had also revealed the importance of standing up for yourself when someone tries to push you around, even if they have an official title. I'd learned a lot about HOA law, about my rights as a homeowner, and about the importance of good neighbors. Tom and I became better friends through the whole ordeal. Mrs. Chen and I started a neighborhood watch program to look out for each other. Jason and his wife became regular dinner guests. The community grew stronger, ironically, because of the conflict Brenda had created. People paid more attention to HOA meetings. They asked questions about the rules and made sure they understood them. They stood up for each other when someone was being treated unfairly. On the 2-year anniversary of the day Brenda fell on her icy sidewalk, Sarah and I hosted a winter barbecue in our driveway. It had snowed the night before, but my heated driveway was perfectly clear and even a bit warm to stand on. We set up tables and chairs, fired up the grill, and invited the whole street. About 30 people showed up, including Patricia and most of the HOA board. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, drank beer and hot chocolate, and celebrated making it through another year of Colorado winters. Speech. Tom called out at one point, raising his beer. "Come on, Quentin, give us a speech." I laughed and shook my head, but everyone started chanting, so I grabbed my beer and stood on one of the chairs. All right, I said. I just want to say thank you all for being such great neighbors. 2 years ago, I was ready to sell this house and move somewhere without an HOA. But you all showed me that the problem wasn't the HOA system itself. It was just one person who'd forgotten that the point of a community association is to serve the community. People clapped and cheered. And I want to especially thank my heated driveway, I continued, getting laughs. Without you, I'd still be out here shoveling snow like a chump, and we wouldn't have this lovely clear space for a winter barbecue. More cheers and laughter. But seriously, thank you all for your support during that whole mess. It meant everything to Sarah and me. Here's to good neighbors, clear driveways, and never taking ourselves too seriously. Everyone raised their glasses, and we toasted to the neighborhood, to winter in Colorado, and to the absurdity of HOA disputes that somehow end up defining a community for the better. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Sarah and I were cleaning up, she put her arm around my waist and looked out at the driveway. "You know what the best part is," she said. "What's that? In a few years, no one will remember Brenda's name. But they'll all remember this as the neighborhood with the great community and the awesome winter barbecues." She was right. That's exactly what happened. 3 years after the lawsuit, a reporter from a national magazine contacted me about doing a story on HOA conflicts and how they can be resolved. I agreed to be interviewed, and the article ran in their home improvement section. It featured my story alongside several others from around the country, all examples of HOA disputes that had spiraled out of control. The article went viral online, and suddenly, I was getting emails and messages from people all over the country who'd had similar experiences. Some wanted advice, some just wanted to share their own horror stories, and some wanted to tell me they'd installed heated driveways because of my story. I even got a message from a woman in Minnesota who said she'd shown the article to her HOA president, who'd been giving her grief about installing solar panels. "Your story gave me the courage to stand my ground," she wrote. "The president backed down, and my solar panels are going in next month. Thank you." That message made the whole ordeal feel worthwhile. If my experience could help other people stand up for their rights and not be bullied by petty tyrants with a little bit of authority, then all the stress and legal fees and frustration had served a purpose. The heated driveway itself became something of a tourist attraction in the neighborhood, in a tongue-in-cheek way. During the annual neighborhood block party, people would take photos standing on it. Someone even made T-shirts that said Meadowbrook Heights, home of the famous heated driveway, with a cartoon drawing of a driveway melting snow. Rick, my contractor, told me his business had tripled since the news story aired. "I've installed 20 heated driveways in the past year," he said. "Every single customer mentions your story. You've been better for my business than any advertising I could buy." I was happy for him. He'd done good work, and he deserved the success. 5 years after the initial installation, the system was still working perfectly with nothing more than routine maintenance. I'd kept meticulous records of its operation, performance, and costs, partly out of habit from the lawsuit and partly because I was genuinely interested in the data. The system had saved me an estimated 250 hours of snow removal labor over those 5 years. It had also completely eliminated my need for ice melt chemicals, which was better for the environment and for the longevity of the concrete. The driveway surface showed no signs of the cracking and pitting that salt typically causes. I'd also tracked the resale values of homes in the neighborhood. The 6 houses with heated driveways, including mine, had all appreciated faster than comparable homes without them. Patricia had been right that they added value, and the market data proved it. But more than the practical benefits, the heated driveway represented something important to me. It was a reminder that doing the right thing and standing up for yourself can be difficult and expensive in the short term, but worthwhile in the long run. It was a testament to the importance of good neighbors and community support. And it was a symbol of how one person's petty grievance can inadvertently bring about positive change. I never heard from Brenda again after she moved. I sometimes wondered if she ever thought about that day, about how her obsession with my driveway had consumed so much time and energy, and ultimately cost her thousands of dollars, her position in the community, and her reputation. I hoped she'd learned something from it, that maybe in her new home, without the pressure of being HOA president, she'd found a way to be less controlling and more accepting of people's differences. But I didn't know, and ultimately, it wasn't my concern anymore. My life moved on. Sarah got a promotion at work. We adopted a golden retriever named Cooper who loved lying on the heated driveway during winter. We made lasting friendships with people in the neighborhood. And every winter, when that first snow fell, I felt a quiet satisfaction watching my driveway clear itself while I sat inside with my coffee and my dog. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA, under Patricia's leadership, became a model for how community associations should operate. They were transparent, fair, and focused on actually serving the residents rather than controlling them. Other HOAs in the area started adopting some of their revised bylaws and procedures. Patricia served as president for 4 years before passing the torch to Marcus, who continued the same reasonable approach. The annual HOA meetings became well attended because people actually wanted to be involved, not because they were afraid of what might happen if they weren't. The neighborhood thrived. Property values increased. New families moved in and old residents stayed. The sense of community was strong, built on mutual respect and the knowledge that we'd all been through something together and come out better for it. And through it all, my heated driveway kept doing its job, silently melting snow, providing a clear path, and serving as a reminder that sometimes the most mundane things can become the center of extraordinary events. I think about that sometimes when I pull into my driveway after work on a snowy evening. The concrete is clear and dry, contrasting sharply with the white accumulation everywhere else. It's such a simple thing, really. Hot water running through tubes embedded in concrete. Nothing complicated or fancy, but it changed everything. It exposed corruption and abuse of power. It brought a community together. It taught me about standing up for myself and the importance of documentation. It led to friendships and connections I never would have made otherwise. It even helped my contractor's business grow and gave other people the courage to stand up to their own HOA bullies, all because I wanted a clear driveway in winter. Looking back now, 7 years after the initial installation, I can honestly say I don't regret any of it. Not the stress, not the legal fees, not the months of harassment. Because all of that led to where we are now with a stronger community, better HOA governance, and a neighborhood full of people who look out for each other. And yes, also several very nice heated driveways. Sarah and I sometimes talk about eventually moving, maybe to a bigger house or a different area. But every time we seriously consider it, we come back to the same conclusion. We love this neighborhood. We love our neighbors. We love the community we've built together. And honestly, I really love not having to shovel snow, so we're staying put. Cooper has his favorite spots in the yard. Our friends are all within walking distance. The HOA functions smoothly and fairly. And every winter, My heated driveway continues to be the best $15,000 I ever spent, even when you factor in the legal fees, because it wasn't just about the driveway. It never really was. It was about standing up for what's right, about community, about not letting petty tyrants win just because they have a title. It was about learning that sometimes conflict is necessary for growth, and that the people who stand with you during difficult times are the ones who matter most. Brenda Vincent thought she was fighting against an ostentatious display that disrupted her vision of neighborhood uniformity. What she was really fighting against was progress, common sense, and the basic principle that homeowners should be free to improve their properties in legal and approved ways. She lost that fight, and in losing it, she inadvertently made everything better for everyone else. There's probably a lesson in there somewhere about unintended consequences and the dangers of letting your ego override your judgment. But I'll leave those philosophical musings to someone else. As for me, I'm just a guy with a heated driveway who learned more about HOA law than I ever wanted to know, made some good friends, stood up to a bully, and came out the other side with some entertaining stories and a perpetually clear driveway. Not a bad outcome, all things considered. And every January 1st, on the anniversary of the day Brenda fell on her icy sidewalk, I make a point to check my driveway drainage system, clear any debris from the street drain, and take a few photos documenting everything. Not because I expect any more legal trouble, but because good habits are worth maintaining. Plus, it makes me smile to remember how far we've all come since that day. From conflict and litigation to community barbecues and neighborhood unity. From one heated driveway that was seen as a problem to 6 heated driveways that are seen as a smart investment. Progress happens in funny ways sometimes. And it all started with hot water, concrete tubes, and one very angry HOA president who couldn't accept that she didn't have the right to control every aspect of her neighbors' lives. Thank you, Brenda, wherever you are. You taught me more than you ever intended to, and in trying to make my life difficult, you inadvertently made it better. My heated driveway and I appreciate the lesson.